Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. How would you compare the nature and outcome of the two recent meetings? First between the United States and Russia in Alaska, and then between the United States, European leaders, and Zelensky.
Well, I think it was fairly obvious for everybody to see. The meeting with Vladimir Putin was cordial. Both Trump and Putin walked away with very good impressions. It all seemed very encouraging and positive. And the two leaders in their meeting obviously gave the impression that they control their respective sides of their camps. They were in control. They were capable of making deals, of entering into negotiations and so forth. Whereas the difference with the European leaders is that everybody came there as a supplicant to Trump. Nobody came there as a sovereign making demands or ready to give concessions. They came to beg. They came to daddy, hoping to, make sure that he still loves them, that he will still protect them and stay with them. And it was almost embarrassing to see them sitting around his desk as wayward children at the principal's office. And they all look like that. I was very surprised because, on the morning of that day, I wrote in my newsletters that we will probably be able to tell more about the outcome of the meeting by the body language of Mr. Zelensky than we will by anything that they tell us in press releases and in conferences for the press. And I was surprised that it's the European leaders who looked the way I expected Zelensky to look, kind of panicked, despondent, not happy. Whereas Zelensky, I looked at him, he looked pretty relaxed. He looked comfortable. And I suspect because he was having a meeting with Trump one-on-one for, I think they allocated more than an hour for that meeting. And only then did they have a meeting together, Zelensky, Trump, and the Europeans. And I kind of suspect that Trump gave Vladimir Zelensky like a golden parachute, like a lifesaver deal to say, look, cooperate with this peace deal and you can extricate yourself with your head on your shoulder. We'll let you walk away with this alive. And I think that this is, at this stage, this is what must be Zelensky's prime preoccupation, whether he will even save his life with this with the defeat of Ukraine. And probably he had Vladimir Putin's reassurances that they will not go after Zelensky. And I think that this is why he was as relaxed as he was. Whereas when he had that press conference with Mark Rutte, Zelensky looked like he just saw death. And on the other hand, it was the European leaders who looked like they saw death this time around. And I suspect that part of the reason has to do with those frozen Russian assets. And I have to throw that in there because one of the things that Donald Trump has been doing in his shuttle diplomacy around the world is he's been getting other nations to make very heavy, very significant investments in the United States. So he got Ursula von der Leyen to commit $600 billion in EU investments in the United States. He got multi-$100 billion deals with UAE, with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia, and so forth. And of course, I very much doubt that Trump wouldn't like a very significant investment from the Russians. And, well, the Russians have about $300 to $335 billion in frozen assets in the West. And most of that money is in Europe. So it's supposedly about $70 billion in France, about $37 billion in the UK. I think something like more than 150, 180 billion in Belgium, in the Euroclear. And I'm sure that Trump, and in the United States, there's only an estimated 5 to 8 billion. That's it. So I'm sure that the very obvious deal that Trump and Putin could do is to say, like, hey, you know, about those frozen assets, maybe it would be nice if you invested it in the United States. We will, you know, make sure it's preferable to EU. We will unfreeze them. We will lift some sanctions. Blah blah blah. And you know, if Vladimir Putin or if Russian government ordered the European countries to transfer those funds to New York, and Donald Trump said, better do it, they would have no recourse but to comply with that. And European powers have already been counting on that money as collateral that they would use to fuel another credit cycle. Emmanuel Macron has been already, or his prime minister or his finance minister, I don't remember exactly, but a few months ago, they were fantasizing about using this money as collateral with which they would then allow French banks to finance French corporations to do reconstruction and development work in Ukraine. So they would say, like, oh, well, you know, Russia destroyed Ukraine, so it's right that Russia should pay for the reconstruction, so we should use that. So they were making all these calculations, and they had all these expectations about being able, together with the United States, to simply confiscate Russian assets. And now I think that nothing's going to come of this, and instead Trump is going to take the money back into the United States, and he's going to make a deal with the Russians. And I think the Russians themselves have every reason in the world to want to do that as well, because the direct threat to Russia is coming from Western Europe and countries like Britain, France, Germany, and Poland. And so, you know, that's exactly who you would want to deprive of that capital, because for sure, in the end, it would end up funding rearmament that would, you know, ultimately be targeting Russia. So I think that, you know, nobody mentioned this before, but I think it's an obvious blow to Europe that I think neither Putin nor Trump will be hesitating to deliver. And I think if there's one thing that's predictable about Donald Trump, is that he will want those $300 billion in the United States.
Krainer believes the meeting with Putin was constructive, while European leaders appeared weak and dependent. Zelensky likely received a personal lifeline deal from Trump. The key blow could be the transfer of frozen Russian assets from Europe to the U.S., weakening the EU and empowering Trump. Europe is losing its U.S. backing, and Ukraine is already out of the game. Do you think Zelensky has emotionally checked out of the conflict while European leaders are in denial about being abandoned by their main protector, the United States?
Yes, it seems to me that the Europeans have made themselves so passive and so subservient to the United States, to the, you know, Anglo-American establishment, that for decades now, not only have they followed the policies dictated by this Anglo-American elite to them, they haven't, you know, they've atrophied in every sense. In you know, they haven't charted their own course. They haven't thought through their any kind of a geostrategic path forward. A strategy of economic development. what European societies should be about, what should be their policy, what should be their aims, what should be their aspirations. They just simply adopted passively this business model of, okay, we will procure resources, energy from Russia and other sources, and natural resources from our former colonies. We will produce advanced industrial goods, and we will export them to Russia, to the United States and China. And this approach got entrenched. It seems to me that the high level thinkers and the policymakers in Europe had the expectancy that the United States would always be their best friend forever, and that they would always be able to depend and lean on the United States, and that this state of affairs would last indefinitely. What they didn't take into account is that this is not necessarily favorable to U.S. interests. And for anybody who read their history, they should know that periodically, maybe once in a generation or two, there's always a reaction from out of the United States to break these bonds with the old colonialist powers of Europe, because they always treat the United States also as their colonial possession. They want the United States to absorb their products, and they want the United States to keep peace in the world for them and to fight wars for them. And that has been exhausting the United States. It's been depleting the United States politically and economically and financially, and it has shredded its reputation. And we have to always remember that the United States became a country exactly as a reaction against this colonialist mindset and this model of governance. So every so often you'll have reactions against this, and a part of American political establishment that will attempt to chart an independent course, and so in the past we had William McKinley, you had FDR, you had John F. Kennedy, and some others, depending on how you analyze it and how far they got with their attempt to change course of the United States. But Donald Trump is not something unique and radically different. He's only the latest that is trying to change course of U.S. policy away from being the errand boy for European colonial interests. Meanwhile, European leaders have become complacent in this relationship of subordination to the United States and leaning on the United States to protect their interests. And now that Trump has shown definitely that he's no longer interested, I think they're completely lost. They have no contingency plan. They have no plan B. They realize they have made no provisions for their own security. They have no independent political or economic strategies, and so they're lost. They're looking pale. They have these blank face expressions, and now they have to go back to square one and figure out what to do. I think that European Union itself, without the protective umbrella from the United States, is going to devolve to squabbling powers, and I think the European Union has no future anymore. I think the same is true for NATO, and so I think that as incompetent as those 7 leaders in the White House are, they're smart enough to understand this, that they have nothing to offer their voters. So they're panicked, I think.
Do you think the ceasefire, once a key goal for the Trump team, has now been quietly dropped from their agenda?
You see, I don't see it that way exactly. I think that Trump was never seriously pushing for this for the ceasefire, and the reason why I believe that is because it was so obvious that this was unacceptable to Russia, and that Russia didn't need to even discuss this at all. And in the discussions between Trump with Putin on the phone, that started in February, and the number of meetings that Steve Witkoff had with Putin and with Lavrov, I think that Russians had plenty of opportunity to make that perfectly clear for them. And, I doubt that people in the Trump administration or he himself are stupid to not understand this. So I think that the reason why they were even pushing this story about the ceasefire was simply some kind of a diversion, as a psychological operation. It was a narrative for public consumption, but I think it wasn't sincere. And I think that the real things were being discussed covertly between the Russian government and the American government. All of this nonsense of General Kellogg and the ceasefire, I think this was just, let's call it narrative appeasement to certain interest networks in the West.
Trump hinted that Putin might tolerate European troops in Ukraine. Is this a signal that he's softening the ground for a new kind of deal involving Western military presence?
I think the case is definitely moving forward, Nima, and very important. I mean, let's remember where we were 7 months ago. We had Joe Biden in the White House, and we had American foreign policy driven by Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken. This is very, very radically different. And I know that it's maybe difficult to appreciate because Trump has dragged us through 7 months of psyops and misdirection and deception and lies and nonsense. But, I think this was not part of the genuine policy making. I think that this was part of the, stage managed chaos so that nobody knows what to expect and what's going to happen in the end. And I think that this statement that you just played on the video is exactly more of that, because he says Trump gives a statement which says exactly nothing. Putin's tired of this. Well, Putin is not going to make the error of drawing a defeat out of the jaws of victory just because he's tired and he lost patience, and then Trump himself says like, oh yeah, it's not going to be a problem. I don't think it's going to be a problem. Well, yeah, it's not going to be a problem because the Russians are going to say no. And then he says, well, we'll find out in a couple of weeks' time, this interview, most people will not even remember it tomorrow, let alone 7 weeks from now, And but one thing I wanted to note, there was a photograph of Zelensky with Trump along with that statement. It strikes me because I don't think we've seen Zelensky this happy in about 3 years now.
Trump and Putin met as equals, signaling possible deals. EU leaders appeared weak and abandoned, realizing U.S. protection is ending. Zelensky looked calm, possibly offered a safe exit by Trump. Ceasefire talk was likely a smokescreen. Real talks happened behind the scenes. Trump's hints about EU troops in Ukraine were theater. Europe is now lost, and the U.S. is reshaping the board in its favor. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.